All right, well, I see it's 1 p.m. Central, so we are going to go ahead and get started. And I'm going to make these announcements really quick because we have a really great presentation with a lot of information. So we're going to just jump right into everything. I am going to be putting some links into our chat here, just some resources. But as always, if you have any questions on any of those materials, you are always welcome to shoot me a message in the chat here while we're online, or send me an email after the call today, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But welcome to our quarterly CSTP conference call. And I'm really excited for you all to hear our presentation today. So with that, I'll hand it on over.
Hi, everyone. We're going to take a moment to introduce ourselves. My name is Mary Ann Hirsch. I serve as the Education Liaison for the Division of Family and Economic Security in Wisconsin, and I also chair the division's Domestic Violence Task Force.
I am Paula Harvat. I am with the partner training team, and our team does training for W-2 case managers and child support staff in Wisconsin. Sarah?
Hi, my name is Sarah Griffin, and I am a representative from Marine Credit Union, and I work as a credit risk manager.
Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Grosskreitz. I'm a data coordinator with the Bureau of Analytics and Research within the Division of Family and Economic Security in Wisconsin. I'm also the chair of the Financial Abuse Awareness Committee, and I'm going to send it back to Mary Ann to get us started.
Thank you for the opportunity to share this training on the invisible crime, how financial abuse impacts the families we serve, and how we can help. The training is designed to shed light on how coercive control over money, including public benefits, is a weapon abusers use to harm and intimidate their victims. We also hope this information will help support partner agency staff and attorneys working with individuals who may be enduring the most common, least visible, and least understood form of abuse. Please be aware that this presentation contains content some people may find triggering or upsetting. We want to acknowledge this and ask you to please take care of yourself and feel free to step away or disengage as needed. The stories you'll hear today were shared with us by members of the Division of Family and Economic Security's Domestic Violence Task Force from 2024 through March of 2025. While these stories are difficult to hear, talking about domestic violence is an important first step to ending it and helping survivors and their children get the economic and safety supports they need. This training represents a collaboration among Division of Family and Economic Security Domestic Violence Task Force members, child support agency professionals from Wisconsin's Network for Safety Counties, and attorneys from the legal advocacy organization Judicare. Throughout this presentation, you'll hear us ask you questions about financial abuse. If you feel comfortable, although it says write answers on the form, that's for a presentation we'll be doing a little bit later this year. For today, if you're comfortable, please feel free when you hear those questions to place your answers in the chat. Today, we will answer 4 questions. What is financial abuse? Why talk about financial abuse? What are the potential signs of financial abuse? And how can we help victims of financial abuse? So let's begin by answering the first question. What exactly is financial abuse? When you're ready, we're going to ask the first question, and feel free to place your answer in the chat. True or false? Financial abuse includes harassment. Yes, as many of you have indicated, the answer is true. Listen to the experiences of one survivor who works at Wisconsin's Department of Children and Families. He harassed me daily at work with text messages and calls threatening suicide. I was so frightened that I couldn't concentrate at work, and I could tell my performance was suffering. I was afraid I'd lose my job if I told my supervisor what was going on. I couldn't stand the drive home because I never knew if that was the day he'd follow through with his threats. I rehearsed in my head over and over what I would do if I found him dead. What would I tell our daughter? The National Network to End Domestic Violence, or NNEDV, defines financial abuse as a common tactic used by abusers to gain power and control and trap victims in a relationship. Financial abuse, along with emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, includes behaviors to intentionally manipulate, intimidate, and threaten the victim to trap that person inside the relationship. Financial abuse tends to begin subtly and progress over time. In some cases, financial abuse is present throughout the relationship. In other cases, financial abuse occurs when the survivor is attempting to leave or has left the relationship. Financially abusive tactics diminish a victim's ability to stay safe after leaving an abusive relationship. Again, according to the NNEDV, financial abuse is often cited by victims as the main reason they stayed with or returned to an abusive partner. Michigan State University psychology professor Adrienne Adams has studied economic abuse for over a decade and offers some clarification about what this form of abuse is not. The difference between arguments about finances, which we may all have, and economic abuse is that abusive control is the intentional use of power and coercion. This is not just two married people making joint decisions about money. It's when the perpetrator says things like, "You're not going to have a job," or "You're going to sign this loan document or else," or "You're going to buy this television for me or else." This is not about partnership. It is about coercive control. What is coercive control? The Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children explains that control in and of itself is not abuse. After all, we all seek and benefit from healthy expressions of our own control over our own lives to increase our ability to have a sense of power and influence over our lives. However, coercive control differs from these healthy expressions. It is the entrapment of another by gaining control over their behavior and choices through force and or threats of force and manipulation. Coercive control is an abusive tactic used because the person using it gains a benefit that comes at the expense of another's sense of self, safety, and well-being. And as the Victim Services Organization Women's Aid points out, coercive and controlling behavior is at the heart of domestic abuse. It often involves gaslighting a victim. You may have heard the term gaslighting before. Gaslighting is a coercive control tactic that shifts the focus of concern from the partner's abusive behavior to the supposed emotional and psychological instability of the survivor. It's when an abuser says things like, "Are you sure? You're always forgetting things." Or, "That's all in your head." Or, "You're crazy. That is not what really happened." Gaslighting can undermine and distort a victim's reality by denying facts, the situation around them, or the victim's feelings and needs. It can be used to make victims feel confused and unsure. It can make it difficult for victims to see financial abuse in their lives. It can prevent victims from reaching out to agencies for help, and it can prevent victims from talking about financial abuse once they're with an agency worker or an attorney. In a 2025 National Public Radio On Point podcast, a survivor shared how her financial abuse involved gaslighting. She said, "I didn't realize what was happening was abuse. I guess we tend to think of extreme physical violence as abuse. And I didn't recognize at first that what was happening to me financially was a form of abuse. My partner and I got into arguments about finances, but it was only when those arguments got violent that I believed I was being abused. What I learned through therapy was that the most frequent tactic my partner used to control me was manipulating finances. He would move money from my account and not tell me, or he would move it and tell me he was punishing me. If I spoke up or asked him what he was doing with our money, he'd yell at me and say that he was the only one working, so he had every right to do with the money anything he wanted to. I was manipulated to believe I was the controlling one. I wasn't even allowed to use the word abuse because he said I was the one causing all the arguments. I started going to therapy and realized what my partner was doing was wrong and controlling. The minute you believe something is not okay, a light bulb goes off. Financial abuse typically takes two forms: restricting and exploiting. Restricting can include the following tactics: preventing a victim from having a job, putting a victim on an allowance, forcing a victim to turn over paychecks or public benefit payments. Exploiting tactics include the following: taking out credit cards or loans in the victim's name, forcing the victim to sign fraudulent tax forms, forcing the victim to agree to a power of attorney so the abuser is able to sign legal documents in the victim's name without the victim's consent. Restrictive or exploitative financial abuse can develop in subtle or overt ways. Please answer question 2 in the chat if you're comfortable. True or false? Financial abuse can be disguised as love.
This answer is also true. Subtle and slow-moving forms of financial abuse tend to develop early in abusive relationships. Early forms of financial abuse can go unnoticed by the victim. The NNEDV clarifies that financial abuse may even initially look like love, as abusers have the capacity to appear very charming and are masterful at manipulation. For example, abusers may make statements such as, "I know you're under a lot of stress right now, so why don't you just let me take care of the finances, and I'll give you money each week to take care of what you need." Under these circumstances, victims may believe that they can or should trust the partner they're in love with and may willingly give over control of the money and how it's spent. This scenario commonly leads abusers to give victims less and less in allowance, and by the time victims decide to take back control of their finances, they may not even have access to their funds anymore. One survivor who spoke to us described subtle financial abuse tactics by her partner used. Her story illustrates the insidious of subtle financial abuse and how an abuser can slowly manipulate a victim by disguising their abusive tactics as love. It all happened when I was about to attend college. My boyfriend, who was already a college student, told me that if I lived with him and his roommates instead of in the dorms my first year, it would save me money. He said he'd charge me a small amount of rent and he'd cover all the other bills, including groceries. So I left home, arrived at college, and moved in with my boyfriend and his roommates, rather than into the dorms. Within a few months, he questioned whether I really needed so many groceries. He refused to buy any of my tampons or pads because he said they were too expensive. He also required me to do all the housekeeping in exchange for him buying groceries. His demands of me increased. Some of them were very sexually demeaning. I had no money, no friends, nowhere else to go. So I complied. By the following spring, he had become more blatant with his abuse, even belittling me in front of our roommates. The roommates had a secret meeting without us. When it was over, they pulled me aside and got me to tell them everything. I was fortunate that they kicked him out and helped me get back on my feet by covering my groceries and paying extra money if I wanted to keep doing the weekly housekeeping. They taught me how I should be treated They became my friends and literally saved me. The NNEDV explains that overt forms of financial abuse typically include violence, threats of violence or self-harm, acts of intimidation, and punishment. A financial abuse victim who shared their story with us illustrates overt forms of financial abuse that continue to impact her economic security. My partner emptied our bank accounts the night before our rent was due and gambled the majority on Bitcoin, which then tanked. Roughly half of our money was gone. My abuser lied about returning it and about trying to get it back for weeks. My abuser also opened joint credit cards and spent funds without telling me, and then lied about having those accounts. Through the financial disclosure process of our divorce proceeding, I discovered just how much he had spent. 6 years later, I continue to find out bits of information about his financial abuse. What happened years ago impacts me whenever I need access to information about my credit. My abuser also had the habit of getting parking tickets on a car that was registered in my name and then never paying them. This still happened even though I got a court order to remove my name from the car loan and to refinance as part of our divorce decree. My abuser was in contempt of that order until almost 9 months after the process was to have been completed. If there had been an accident while my abuser was driving that vehicle, I would have been liable for the damages. I had plenty of reason to worry about that because my abuser had often been reckless and dangerous, sometimes intentionally to cause fear and anxiety when I was a passenger. Now that we understand what financial abuse is, let's look at that second question. Why talk about financial abuse? We have another survey question for you. Please answer this one. What percentage of domestic abuse survivors experience financial abuse? 25, 50, 75, or 99%? It may surprise you to learn how common financial abuse is. According to Legal Aid of Washington, D.C., it's estimated that 99% of all survivors experience financial abuse. It's also critical to talk about financial abuse because it meets the definition of domestic violence. It is a pattern of behaviors or actions used to intimidate and threaten another person. Also, financial abuse, unlike physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, is not often visible to others. It's unlikely, for example, your supervisor knows that your absence from work is the result of your abuser taking your car without asking or hiding your keys and reprimanding you for losing them, or saying they will babysit and then not showing up. Finally, financial abuse is linked to physical safety and long-term economic instability. According to the organization Surviving Economic Abuse, women who experience financial abuse are 5 times more likely to experience physical abuse than those who don't, and they are at a risk of being killed. Financial abuse has long-term devastating impacts on victims and their children, including increasing employment and housing instability, damaging credit scores, interfering with children's ability to do well in school, and creating mental health conditions for victims and their children, such as anxiety, depression, and feelings of worthlessness. Another Department of Children and Families employee shared the story with us that illustrates many of those long-term impacts. My perpetrator wielded power and control over me in so many ways, and although I no longer worry that he'll come after me with a knife or leave me in a locked car on railroad tracks since he lives in another state, I'm still recovering from the financial devastation he caused me throughout our 20-year marriage. One of the reasons I ultimately left was that I refused to lie on my taxes, which he tried to force me to do. For years, he quit jobs without telling me, which is why I worked 2 jobs throughout our marriage. He pawned my jewelry, including my engagement ring, without telling me. He refused to land a job that offered health insurance, saying that that was my responsibility. When he quit one of his jobs and our daughter ended up needing long-term medical care, he forced me to cash out my 401k to pay for her hospitalization and medications. He took out a loan in my name and refused to pay it back. When I finally divorced him in 2018, our settlement agreement indicated that he had to pay a portion of our joint debt, including that loan. 3 weeks after the divorce, he called me and said, I just filed for bankruptcy and I'm not paying you anything I'm supposed to. You're on your own. F you. I hope you die. I took all of the debt out. I took all of the debt out in fear he'd show up in my house. Financial abuse can also significantly impact housing security for children and families. According to the National Center for Homeless Education, domestic violence is the leading cause of homelessness among women and children. We have another survey question for you. What percentage of all domestic abuse victims become homeless at some point during their lives? 20, 38, 60, or 80? For this one, the answer is actually 38%. Another short story shared by another DCF employee illustrates the impact of economic abuse on housing security. The worst thing that was ever done to me was not the beatings, the withholding of food, living without necessities, and not receiving medical care, or even the constant state of fear I lived in for so many years. It was losing my home and the job I loved years later. This was not because of my ex-husband, but because of my boss's boss. My boss's boss drugged and assaulted me. I reported it immediately once I realized what had happened to me. I cooperated with the investigation, but the investigation was no more than him being asked questions and them telling me it was his word against mine, and he was a longer term employee than I. They never interviewed any of the witnesses. Years later, that supervisor was allowed to eliminate my job. There was a budget cut, but he had the power to choose what position to eliminate. This caused me to relocate for a new job. Now, it might not seem like the end of the world to anyone else, but to me it was. I had just reestablished myself fully after years of abuse by my ex-husband, and here it is happening all over again. I had to now work in the same building as him, and he spread stories about me far and wide. People who were witnesses to the drugging also worked in the building. They would turn their backs when I walked by. I lost my job. I lost my home, the only home I ever had, and to this day I'm housing insecure. The worst kind of abuse I ever suffered was having my abuser take away my home, my security, and my financial stability. It is also critical to talk about financial abuse so that we can do more as a division and community to support children and families. In September of 2024, our DV Task Force Committee asked all 75 of our members to complete a survey so we could assess their experience with financial abuse. The survey results revealed that questions number 2 and 7, which are shown on the screen, provided significant insight. As you can see, over 72% of the respondents answered yes to the question, in your line of work, have you ever helped or come in contact with someone experiencing financial abuse? Yet when asked if you work at a child support, refugee support, or Wisconsin Works agency, do you recommend or use any financial literacy tools? Over 60% of the respondents answered no. The survey helped us understand that many of us, whether we're creating policies or working directly with people experiencing financial abuse, might not have the tools and the resources to help them become economically and socially secure. But perhaps one of the most important reasons to talk about financial abuse is that there is an unfortunate connection between our Division of Family and Economic Security programs and the potential for increased harm to victims of domestic abuse. Abusers use specific tactics to manipulate economic mobility programs, including child support, Wisconsin Works, refugee and immigrant supports, to intimidate, shame, control, and keep victims trapped in poverty and dependence. In the following slides, you'll hear examples of how abusers manipulate W-2 and other federal programs, such as SNAP. These examples were shared with us at the DV Task Force, who have experienced many of these forms of coercive control. Abusers may force victims to go to a county building together to apply for the benefits, but then refuse to come in for the appointment. The abusers often humiliate victims in front of their children by making sure children know your mom is on welfare. Abusers may force victims to hand over their public benefits. Abusers threaten to report victims for welfare fraud, child neglect, or other crimes if victims try to leave or refuse the abuser's demands. Victims who need assistance from Wisconsin Works disengage from the application process. After hearing how abusers use benefit programs as weapons, you may have questions. Our W-2 workers, Wisconsin Works, might wonder, how would I know if the participant is being manipulated to apply for benefits fraudulently? Attorneys might be wondering, is it considered fraud if a victim has been abused and forced to apply for public benefits? If so, who's at fault? The perpetrator or the victim? We'll answer these questions as we move through this training. For now, let's uncover how child support and court systems are used as weapons. Abusers may threaten they will never pay child support. Abusers may intentionally drag out divorce case to cause financial harm or to force the victim from moving forward with the case. The abusers may threaten physical harm if the victim asks for support. Abusers may intentionally fail to make the child support payments. Abusers may use threatening glances, nonverbal communication, or intentionally stand as close to the victim as possible during court proceedings to induce fear and prevent the victim from admitting abuse is occurring in their relationship. During court proceedings, abusers may intentionally not exhibit any signs they are abusive in attempts to convince the judges to grant joint custody. Abusers may try to open a child support case in a state where the victim has fled due to domestic violence, even when the order already exists in another state. This may cause victims to feel stalked, victimized, confused, and fearful. According to the Harvard Law Review, examples like these highlight how DV survivors are often subjected to continued abuse because of the unique leverage of our court systems to abusers. The adversarial nature of our legal system means the abusers can continue to file lawsuits against their victims, force proximity to them in a courtroom, at some or all court proceedings. Tactics like these make survivors reluctant to seek legal help in the first place.
Please take a moment now to answer our survey question number 5. Which of these statements is true? Identifying information such as a work address is kept confidential by courts to protect the survivor. Or B, abusers may manipulate the court system to obtain identifying information about the survivor. And the answer is B. Here is a story we heard from a task force member about coercive control tactics her adult daughter endured while moving through her child support case. My daughter's abuser manipulated the child support court to obtain as much personal information about my daughter as he could get from me as requested by his attorney, including my daughter's address, work location, and their children's social security numbers. The abuser claimed that he wanted the social security numbers so he could file for the child tax credit, even though he hadn't seen his children in years. My daughter did not have an attorney, but her abuser did. My daughter showed up in person, taking unpaid leave, but since her abuser had an attorney, he was permitted to testify virtually. She was threatened by the courts that she would be in contempt if she did not show up in person to every hearing. Her abuser would intentionally prolong the court proceedings, knowing that every time my daughter had to attend in person, she would have to miss work and would not get paid. This was yet another attempt to control her emotionally and wear her down financially. Since they no longer lived together, and since he had no relationship with their children due to his ongoing drug use and criminal activities, the only opportunity he had to control her was through the court proceeding. Immigrants and refugees face unique challenges when trapped by financially abusive partners who may threaten to report them to authorities. Immigrant and refugee women often face two challenges: financial abuse by their partner and restricted access to financial support when seeking help for domestic violence. Abusers may threaten to cut victims off from money if they refuse to do what the abuser says. Abusers may threaten to report victims to authorities if they do not comply with their demands. Abusers may force victims to work for their family without pay. And changes in gender roles around employment and finances after immigration often contribute to escalation in violence. Researchers at the University of Melbourne in Australia clarify the connection between gender roles, immigration, and financial abuse. Our research, they point out, identified how changes in gender roles around employment and finances after immigration contribute to escalation in violence and isolation of the victim. Many immigrant women victims associated family violence with the resentment men felt about their loss of financial status, lack of recognition of overseas qualifications, and employment experience, and women's increase in access to financial independence in new countries. Remember, though, that gender can play a role in any community, not just communities of immigrants and refugees. Religion, conservative beliefs, and cultural norms may also keep women trapped in abusive, controlling relationships. One story we learned about illustrates several challenges financially abused immigrants and refugees face. An immigrant who came to the United States after marrying experienced her husband controlling every aspect of their lives, including managing the bank accounts, paying the bills, and managing how she cared for their children. She really wasn't allowed to leave the house. After 5 years, she was able to leave the relationship, but she didn't know where to go for help in her new country. She filled out an application for an apartment, but it was denied due to her poor credit rating. That's when she pulled her credit report, which revealed that she was responsible for more than $33,000 of debt. Her husband had put his business in her name. Suddenly, she faced the additional challenges of managing this debt and rebuilding her credit. Now that we understand what financial abuse is and why we should talk about it, let's turn to question number 3. How can you recognize signs of financial abuse? We'll share 3 ways you can identify whether participants are victims of financial abuse. Listen for clues, brief the participant, and use a financial abuse screening tool. These suggestions also help answer the question we posed earlier, which was, how would I know the participant is being forced to apply for benefits fraudulently? First, listen for clues. Sometimes we hear things we may not even recognize as financial abuse. Consider this scenario. You've scheduled a meeting with a participant and they're running late. When they do arrive, they tell you that they had a hard time finding a parking spot that didn't have a parking meter. Your initial reaction might be, wow, this person is really careful with their money. But as you converse, you might hear other comments about money that make you wonder if financial abuse might be occurring. Thinking about the following questions before you meet with a participant may help you fine-tune your ability to identify signs of financial abuse. Prepare yourself to listen carefully to the following concerns your participants may share without any prompting from you. Hearing any of these concerns might give you reason to suspect financial abuse. We've created a desk aid with these questions, which include, do they talk about money, jewelry, or other valuables being stolen or pawned? Does their verbal language align with their nonverbal cues? Does their partner refuse to work or pay bills? Are they forced to provide access to all financial accounts, or are they forced to share passwords to financial accounts? Do they have little or no knowledge of household expenses? Is their money controlled? Are they forbidden to work? Are they coping with frequent calls, texts, or distractions from their partner that impact their ability to concentrate at work? Have they been forced to file fraudulent tax returns or other legal or financial documents? Have they had food, water, clothing, medication, transportation, or shelter withheld from them? Have their partners manipulated the child support process or threatened not to pay child support? Has their partner trashed their residence and left the individual to suffer an eviction? Even if you don't hear any of these concerns, you may consider directly questioning the participant, but before you do so, it's imperative you brief the participant. If you have decided to ask the participant directly, either by using a screening tool or by asking the questions yourself, briefing is essential. Briefing a participant who is currently being traumatized by an abuser helps reduce anxiety and mistrust. Traumatized participants need safety, predictability, and clarity. Why? According to Surviving Economic Abuse, survivors are likely to have had negative or even harmful experiences of being asked questions. They may have been disrespectfully and repeatedly grilled by their abuser or repeatedly asked to share their stories and personal information with other service agencies. To provide safety, address the where. It is helpful to set up a quiet, private area for questioning and arrange chairs to meet their needs. Survivors report they are more relaxed in answering questions if someone is sitting next to them rather than across a desk. To provide predictability, address the why. Tell participants why you are asking questions by emphasizing your desire to support them as best you can. For example, you can say, financial abuse is when your partner has interfered with your money or other resources, such as food, to stop you from being in control of your own life and making your own choices. I'll ask you some questions to help me identify if you've been affected by financial abuse, and if so, how can I best support you? To provide clarity, address the how. How you ask questions is critical for building trust. You can do this by using trauma-sensitive statements before asking questions or using a financial abuse screening tool. Trauma-sensitive questioning acknowledges the participant's ability to make their own choices and respects their comfort level, allowing them to choose whether or not to answer the questions, to answer potentially sensitive or personal questions. This communication strategy was influenced by the groundbreaking research of Dr. Judith Herman, whose work with women in domestic violence shelters significantly informed the concept and understanding of complex trauma. The approach offers opportunities for participants to be in charge of their own choices. It's about creating a safe and supportive environment for participants to explore their experiences while also respecting their individual needs and space. Using phrases like, if you feel comfortable, would you be comfortable sharing? When you're ready, if you're okay with me asking. Acknowledge the possibility of discomfort. Indicate you are respecting the client's privacy and empowering the participant to decide whether to engage further, placing power, something that has been taken away by the abuser, in their hand. Providing clarity also means making sure participants know guidelines and expectations. Surviving economic abuse suggests sharing the following guidelines with participants before using a financial abuse screening tool. You can have as much time as you need, and it's okay to stop at any point and come back to the questions later. If you remember something and you want to change or add to any of your earlier answers, please do. If you're not sure what the question is about, please ask me. Things in your life might change every day. Please answer the questions by thinking about the times when things have been at their worst. Once you have briefed the participant, you can use a formal financial abuse screening tool to gather information about the participant's experiences and needs. Many domestic violence screening tools are used to identify physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. Using a screening tool specifically designed to unearth financial abuse helps us to understand the participant's financial trauma and helps us to determine how we can best help. The screening tool in the link, which was developed by the organization Surviving Domestic Abuse, features 19 questions participants can answer by selecting never, hardly ever, sometimes, often, or very often. When asked questions such as, does your partner ever tell you how you must spend your money rather than letting you make those decisions? The optional 20th question is open-ended and asks, has anything else happened to you with money, work, or your possessions, which is not covered in the questions above?
Once you've determined participants are victims of financial abuse, the question becomes, how do we support them? We'll share 5 strategies agency workers and attorneys can use to help financial abuse victims. The suggestions are supporting participants without judgment, suggesting the creation of a safety plan, referring participants to existing financial empowerment or legal resources, encouraging participants to seek support from a domestic violence advocate, continuing your own personal education about domestic violence. Let's look at all 5 of these. The first strategy is to support survivors without judgment. But what does that really mean? According to New York's Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence, it means letting go of any expectations that you might have about domestic abuse. Challenge false attitudes and beliefs that you might have about domestic violence and financial abuse. Believe victims and let them know that you do. Remember that victims typically act differently in public than they do in private. A calm demeanor might not always mean abuse isn't occurring. Listen to what they tell you and avoid making judgments and giving advice. They will let you know what they need. Validate their feelings. It's common for victims to have conflicting feelings at the same time: love and fear, guilt and anger, hope and sadness. Let them know that these feelings are normal. Take it seriously. If you are concerned about their safety, tell them that you're concerned, but without judgment, by saying, your situation sounds dangerous and I'm concerned about your safety. Give them control. Abuse can take control away from victims. support and respect their decisions, and about who to tell and what steps they want to take, and what types of support they need. Finally, clarify the supports you can and cannot provide. This allows them to take control of their safety and their next steps. Remember that there are risks with every decision a victim makes, and there are no one right way to make individuals react. If you're really wanting to be helpful, be patient and respectful about their decisions, even if you don't agree with them. Here's a story about how false attitudes and beliefs about domestic violence and women's roles as wives can harm victims. At a 2024 Poverty Matters conference, when one victim shared that when she finally reached out to her mother to tell her about her financial abuse, her husband was um, administering how terrified she'd become. Her mother replied, "At least he doesn't hit you." The victim stopped reaching out for help until she became homeless. Please take a moment to answer the next survey question. True or false? Agency workers at a child support office can assist survivors with safety planning. The answer is true, but we always recommend you follow your agency policy. While typically agency DV advocates are the ones that help victims create a safety plan, you can help prepare victims for creating a safety plan. Once you suspect financial abuse, use trauma-sensitive language to allow the participant to decide whether they're ready to hear about safety planning. If the participant agrees, you can help them anticipate what to expect if they decide to meet with a domestic violence advocate. Let them know some or all of the following. It's common for abusive partners to hide information about assets, including bank accounts and liabilities, which are your debts. You're not alone, and the abuse is not your fault. Consider looking for this information about your finances, including identity documents like Social Security numbers, marriage certificates, birth certificates, immigration documents, bank and credit card statements, rental agreements, insurance, health, auto, life, dental, all of those things. Make copies and hide them in a safe place. Take pictures of what you do own, and if possible, save money secretly. You could use save money secretly. This could be used for emergencies if you need to flee. Some possible ideas for saving are change from purchases or opening a personal checking account at a separate bank in your name alone, or opening a credit card in your name. Start thinking about the needs that you would have when you do leave, like housing or the internet. A third strategy is to share financial literacy and empowerment resources. Since 2005, the NNEDV and the Allstate Foundation have partnered to deliver trainings and information about financial literacy for survivors through the Moving Ahead curriculum, which is available both in English and Spanish on the Allstate Foundation's website. For some of us who have worked in the financial industry, this is the most comprehensive amount of training that we've ever found, both for financial workers and non-financial workers. And the link to the curriculum is here on the site for you. The fourth strategy is to get a professional involved. Refer the individual to your state's DV coalition. Here in Wisconsin, the state DV coalition is End Domestic Abuse Wisconsin, whose website features an interactive map to help victims locate shelters and advocacy centers in their area. A helpful resource is also thehotline.org, which provides a variety of culturally relevant supports, including supports for teens. The final strategy is continuing to learn about domestic violence. Consider exploring these organizations to learn more about domestic violence. Many of these websites offer their own trainings and short courses to help you increase your understanding of domestic abuse, of stalking, of federal and state laws, and of protecting survivors, and how to help survivors navigate safety systems. We have Wisconsin's State Coalition, which is again End Domestic Abuse Wisconsin, Stalking Awareness, which is Spark, the National Network to End Domestic Abuse, and Futures Without Violence, just to name a few. And all of these resources were used to collaborate on this presentation today. For attorneys, specifically looking for information, there are several websites that offer training and information about domestic violence, including the Practicing Law Institute, the Wisconsin Bar Marketplace, Judicare and Legal Action. Remember the third question that we asked earlier, which was, is it considered fraud if a victim has been abused and forced to apply for public benefits? If so, who is at fault, the perpetrator or the victim? Our learning journey led us to attorneys, and the answer is yes, it is considered fraud to apply for public benefits fraudulently. Unfortunately, both the perpetrator and the victim could be responsible, but domestic abuse could be used as a defense for the victim. However, the rules that govern the program that was being abused would ultimately be what's referred to and responsible for determining the penalties. So benefit agencies should start by turning to their contracts for guidance on those situations. So child support agency staff might find a 2022 publication released by the Administration for Children and Families, an informative resource. The ACF reports that 40% of custodial parents in the 4D child support program have experienced domestic violence with the other parent on the child support case, and that perpetrators of domestic violence frequently take physical custody of children and file for child support services to continue to harass and financially abuse the other parent. The website here on the screen takes you to the report, which features several resources, training opportunities, and examples of how child support programs in various states are addressing the intersection of family violence and child support. One of the examples is Wisconsin's Safe Access for Victims Economic Security Demonstration Project. In September 2022, the Office of Child Support Engagement awarded demonstration grant funding to 1 tribal and 12 state child support agencies for the Safe Access for Victims Economic Security, also known as SAVES project. SAVES represents a new national demonstration model designed to develop, evaluate, and implement best practices to provide safe and full access to Wisconsin child support and parenting time. Wisconsin's SAVES program is called Wisconsin's Network for Safety, or WINS. WINS sites include St. Croix, Brown, and Kenosha counties. The counties have developed and offer safety measures to increase chances of getting child support to children, and they also help participants understand the implications and accurate placement plans. They ensure placement plans reflect realistic parenting time arrangements, and they help courts and judicial staff understand placement and safety needs. Ultimately, WINS protocols and procedures will be shared statewide throughout Wisconsin, helping survivors have safe and full access to child support and parenting time services. So to wrap up today, we hope that this training increased your understanding of what financial abuse is, why it's important to talk about financial abuse, how to recognize potential signs of financial abuse, and how to support survivors. Please remember, all the stories you heard were told by survivors who escaped. You'll be working with victims who are in the thick of an abusive situation. Just because someone goes back doesn't mean they're lying. Please give them the time and space that they need. And it looks like we have a couple of minutes available for questions if there are questions or feedback. But we'll turn it over to you, Jenny.
Yes, thank you all so much for presenting on such a difficult topic and just providing such powerful and helpful information. I hope that everyone on the call today is able to use some of these techniques in their work and kind of spread this message. It's really, really important.